Hi, I'm Antonella Di Giulio, and I welcome you to Web Piano Academy Livestream. In this livestream, we will talk to Dr. Tiffany Nicely about African drummings and about her experiences with this type of music. Now, Tiffany Nicely holds a bachelor in percussion performance theory and composition from the University of New Mexico, a master's in composition and music theory from SUNY Buffalo, and she has recently earned her PhD in music theory from the University at Buffalo. In addition, Tiffany has studied traditional percussion in Brazil, Mexico, Guinea, and Ghana. She teaches music theory, world music, studio percussion, and she directs the World Mallets Ensemble and African Drumming Ensemble at SUNY Fredonia. She's also a frequent performer of traditional percussion across Western New York. So let's welcome Tiffany, and I will put just this here just a second. Hi, hello.
Hi, Antonella.
So let's talk a little bit about you and about how you ended up just like being interested in African drummings and in drummings in general, right? Because your first degree was in percussion.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, it all started with the piano.
Wow.
Yeah. My mom put us into piano lessons, all of the kids, there are 5 of us, when we were, like, 2nd grade.
Right.
And so for my whole childhood, I played piano, and then in high school, the band director recruited me because his percussionists couldn't read music.
That's a problem, right?
Yes. And so
Yes.
the piano knowledge would transfer very well to the xylophone and the marimba. And then
Right.
I also started playing the other percussion instruments.
Right, because it should have been easy. You know, once you can play the piano and the rhythm and all those polyrhythms in the piano, right? And then it
Yeah,
is easy to transfer that to percussions. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then I just had to pick up the physical technique to play the drums as well as the mallet
Right.
instruments. So when I was in grad school here in Buffalo the first time, I was in grad school in the 90s, and then I came back in the teens. Um,
You're an example of somebody like me, on the other hand. Like so we are lifelong
we
learners,
are.
right? So yeah, we will never stop learning for any reason.
Can't stop. So I met Ringo, who I'm still with, my life partner Ringo, and he introduced me to West African djembe and dundun drumming. So it
Wow.
was really through our connection to each other and to the music, and that started me on that journey. And then I started seeking out teachers from Africa, and
Yes.
eventually I was able to go to Guinea in 2008.
Wow.
And then I just continued studying with my African teachers. There's a lot of expatriates, as you might
Hmm.
imagine. Africa is a really hard place to live, and if you can live in the
Right.
States, it's really helpful. A lot of them send most of their income back home to their families. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
people to study with, like in New York City, for
Yeah.
example.
That's awesome. So, what is, I mean, for somebody who is not really, uh, has no knowledge about African drumming, so what is different? I mean, I know that they consider music as part of the community, so it's just like part of life, right? So, what is
Yeah,
the difference?
that's a very good question. I think there's a lot of differences in terms of what is officially music, what is a performance or a musical experience in
Hmm.
the community.
Yeah.
There's a lot of I first of all, not everybody drums in West Africa. It is still a specialty. It's just
Yeah.
not necessarily something you would make your living at for most
Hmm.
drummers. They do it in addition to their full-time employment. Everyone though dances and sings, so the
Yeah.
music is really a part of every communal event,
Hmm.
whether it's a happy or a sad one.
Yes.
Um, so it also varies quite a bit whether you're talking about out in the village where versus in the city.
Yeah.
In the village, drumming can happen anytime. It can be very informal. It
Hmm.
can start with just 1 or 2 people, playing, and then if other people feel like dancing or joining in, that can happen. I
Yeah.
was really mostly in the city, the capital city of Guinea, which is Conakry, And then later I've been to Ghana now 4 times. So, but again, mostly in the city because
Yeah.
it's so hard to go out into the middle of nowhere.
Right.
The roads are not good, so it takes forever of bumpy rides, and then it's just difficult. So I chose to be a baby and stay in the city.
Yeah. How is I mean, how is that learned over there? So do they have a special school, specialties that, do they have a teacher like here, you go to a music school and then you take lessons, or how is it that, because I was in a conference and we were talking about how in South America, in some of the villages, they learn music from each other, just like imitating each other, and they're just like adding more complexity as far as they can go and as far as they
Mm.
can play an instrument. We were talking about flutes in particular, but so is it something similar over there, or?
Actually, it's more of an apprenticeship.
Mhm.
If you So of course, little kids, yes, they start by emulating what the big kids and what the grown-ups are doing. They sit
Right,
on the edge and play on maybe even a bucket or a can rather
right,
than a drum to sort of start to become
yeah,
coordinated. If the adults notice that they have talent and that they're really interested, a lot of
yeah,
times that leads to an apprenticeship, and it's usually not with your own father. And first of all, let's just say this is almost 100% men.
mhm,
Women
yeah,
really don't play drums in Guinea. They do in Ghana. They're starting to in Ghana more. The contrast between those two countries
yeah,
is actually pretty interesting. But in Guinea, it's almost always boys finding an apprentice, I'm sorry, a mentor who might be an uncle,
uh-huh,
right, or a friend, and then they become the supporting drummer for that person to be the lead drummer, or they join a small troupe. And then
yeah,
it's really quite interesting because if you play a very simple accompaniment pattern for hours and hours and hours every time there's a gig,
yeah,
then you really absorb what the master drummer is doing that way
right, yeah.
through your ear.
Yeah, that's awesome. It was a little bit the way that I mean, any kind of art was basically learned in the past, right? So we kind of went to the master, and then we started kind of practicing with the master, right? So if you talk about, we think about the origin of the conservatories, right, where these kids were trained, right? Basically, they were finding a mentor who would just like guide them. In this musical journey, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so it's just like so. What age do they start kind of drumming? Those kind of how what is kind of the timeline of this kind of type of education over there? So do you have an idea?
Oh,
Like,
sure. Early teens would be when you would start to find a mentor, and then the teenage years and up to 20 are really important years to absorb what you're hearing while you play the accompaniment parts. And then in terms of leaders, it tends to be upper 20s and 30s. And interestingly, at least in the city, a lot of people give up drumming past their mid 30s. So it's kind of a young man's gig.
oh,
And
I see. So
yeah, in the village, it of course is different. You probably, if you're a drummer in your village, you'd always be a drummer in your village. But yeah,
yeah,
the teenage years are really important for picking up um,
yeah.
what you
Yeah,
need to.
you were talking about drumming on some kind of some kind of things, and I was thinking about myself drumming in my grandma's kitchen when I was 2 or 3 years old. It was just a kind of she was singing and I was accompanying her with any kind of rhythm. But
Awesome.
probably it was a little bit they start a little bit later. But I mean, kids are exposed to this kind of rhythm since birth. I mean, basically.
Yeah, since the womb, because since all the moms dance,
Yeah,
it's really in fact, in Guinea, the women still wear their babies on their backs all the time, tied with a
yeah.
colorful cloth.
Oh, they're
So
basically dancing too.
so the babies are dancing all the
Yes.
time. And, when the moms are dancing, the babies are attached. So it's really quite wonderful how they get trained. It's
Yeah.
before walking.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Having that musical ear, and then probably they also interiorize all this complexity, right, without even thinking about.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was fascinated once because I was watching those dances, and I had the sound off, and I mean, without the sound, I could imagine that dance as being a slow dance, like a slow dance where they
Oh,
were just moving like this, right? And they were not just like it didn't feel to me that it was a fast kind of rhythm, below that. But then I had I kind of switched to the sound on, and the rhythm was pretty fast, right? And I could have never imagined it. It almost seemed very, very different. But then combining them together, that all fit, right? So it feels like they have this kind of big hypermeter where they are all together
yes,
at one point.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely. And it's true. If you just go with your metronome, the tempos are definitely on the fast side, even if the dance steps are more sort of regal and fluid, like you were showing, like what you did a minute ago.
yeah, yeah, sort of. Uh, um, so now you focus mostly on the polyrhythm and kind of how those rhythms are combined together, right? So in your studies, what is interesting about? Because I kind of I heard a lot of interesting things from you in the past when we talked about. But so what is the interesting? So the most interesting part about how this kind of rhythmic patterns are combined and
Okay, that's a very good question. I mean, it has to do with multiplying the complexity. If you play long, short, short, long, short, short, for example, that's a very basic rhythm. But if
yeah,
someone else is doing it twice as fast, long, short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, it starts to interlock in an interesting way.
yeah,
Um, so I'm interested in how the simplicity and the complexity are both necessary. Like
hmm,
I mean, in other traditions, each player is doing something much more complicated. And
right,
in other traditions, there are, for example, in North Indian tabla music, just one drummer with two drums playing an amazing amount of complexity. But in the music that I'm studying, it really requires a group of people. So it's about the social
yeah,
community cohesion that
right.
that's really literally wrapped up in what they're doing when they play music together. And that's why my dissertation is entitled "A Community-Driven Musical Syntax:
Yeah.
Collaboration and Momentum in Guinea and Malay Dance Drumming." So I wanted to put that forefront.
Yeah. So as a community, how do they come up with this kind of? If I would do short, long, short, short, long, short, short, and then you decide, do you just decide to like
Ah,
to double that, or to
no,
do that
I
twice
mean,
as? Or,
most of them are actually sort of similar densities. So that example wasn't super authentic, but there's a vocabulary of patterns
uh-huh.
that you learn in those apprenticeship years when you're
Right.
accompanying your master or your mentor. And so if you want to play a particular piece, there's going to be several aspects of it that are what I call generic.
Uh-huh.
They it could be a lot of pieces. And then
Right.
there's a few drums within the ensemble that play rhythms that are unique to what you're doing. And
Uh-huh.
those are actually played with sticks. Those are the bass drums called doon doons.
Uh-huh.
And what they do in a sort of call and response between two low pitched drums
Mhm.
is the signature rhythm for the piece that you're doing. So you've
Nice.
got generic accompaniment amongst several djembes, specific accompaniment to a one piece amongst those stick bass drums. And then on top of that, the lead djembe improvisation is in the moment specific to that
Well, isn't
experience.
it a little bit what? a jazz ensemble would do,
Mhm.
right? So you would do it. But then if you look at the origin of jazz music, right, it's kind of basically, it has kind of the same roots, right? But
Yes,
there is
absolutely.
obviously a basic, harmonization, or kind of where everybody knows what to do, right? And then there's somebody who would improvise at one point over that kind of thing that everybody else is doing. So it's interesting how they combined
Mhm.
those things. So because then you use obviously you use piano and other instruments, right, in jazz and ensemble. Well, they do the same just with percussion instruments over there.
Mhm.
Um, and so those pieces, they are so they are kind of basically standard pieces, right? That everybody knows, and then they know what to
Yeah.
do.
Um,
And then yeah, yeah, go ahead.
yes, there's so each group would have their own repertoire of pieces that they like to do.
Yeah.
The repertoire that I analyzed in the dissertation was about 70 specific
Hmm.
pieces. Now, that's not to say everyone would play all 70 because many of them have many, many versions. In fact, some
Right.
of the pieces in the dissertation, there's multiple versions even within the dissertation that I'm counting as part of the
Right.
70. Um, and it has to do with what the music is for and what dance it's for. So
Yeah.
there's like a whole family of agricultural rhythms because most Guineans are still farmers in terms
Right.
of statistics. So there's quite a variety of rhythms that are associated with the agricultural cycle.
Hmm.
And then you've got, of course, celebratory rhythms, things that happen around the life cycle, which for Guineans is birth, initiation, and marriage. You
Hmm.
don't actually play music at a funeral because they're mostly Muslims, and that would be
Uh-huh. Yeah.
forbidden. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so each piece, if you want to call it that, I mean, I'm using our, word, but each
Yeah.
piece is one sort of an intention. What's it
Mhm.
for? What's happening? And then what's that signature accompaniment in those bass drums? And then we layer everything else together and put a solo on top,
Right.
and then you've got your experience.
Yeah. Is it difficult for somebody who has not experienced that kind of rhythm, since birth, to go and just learn that and then just interiorize
Mhm.
that kind of rhythmic patterns, or
There's a quite a wide variety of difficulty, and what I find is some of the pieces are pretty. I mean, okay, so there's the physical element of technique
Mhm.
that is part of it, right? So if I'm using my hands correctly, I can make at least three different sounds on the hand drum, on the djembe drum, the bass, the tone, and the slap. So for beginners who have musical experience or are talented in terms of rhythm, there is a period where they're playing the rhythms correctly, but the sounds aren't really right. So
Yeah.
there's that aspect.
Yeah.
But within the actual rhythms, even the accompaniment patterns, there are some that are very difficult for
Yeah.
Westerners to hear. And
Yeah.
usually they're in 12/8 and they are sort of off the beat and based on quarter notes. And that can really mix up an American or European listener,
Yeah. Yeah,
even
I mean,
though.
it is very difficult to really kind of play that kind of rhythm. I kind of think about whenever, I mean, I'm classically trained. So if somebody would ask me to play something in a pop rock kind of thing, I just feel obviously a little bit kind of, despite I know that, but because I never played that kind of genre, it is for me very difficult to really kind of feel free, right? And
Mhm.
to play the instrument. So I assume that it should be very difficult because it's really not even part of our culture. It's a different cultural environment. So it must be very difficult to really interiorize all the rhythm.
Yes, and what's fascinating is sometimes the person teaching the class, the person from Guinea, can't tell why it's difficult. Or
Yeah,
sometimes they say, "Oh, let's do this rhythm," and I'll say, "Oh no, it's hard. We're never going to get this group's never going to get it." And
right.
they just don't. It's so interesting that what qualifies as difficult in their ear is so different from what
Yeah,
we're, and it's always something about an offbeat or a quarter note based rhythm in a 12/8 time that just
Well,
throws.
but I think when I kind of was, well, when I was researching for my own dissertation, I read a lot about neuroscience, about how we really learn things. And then if a pattern is repeated for enough times, that becomes part of our reflexive brain. So, which is like, if you learn something when you are when you are a newborn, then and you hear that over and over and over again, that's part of your reflexive brain, and it is part
Cool.
of how you breathe, or how you eat, and how you think, and all those things. So,
Oh,
so
that's so cool.
yeah, so, but if we have to learn new, we have to control everything. So
Yeah.
imagine learning a new language. You have to. I know a lot about that, but you have really to think a lot before that second language will become part of how you are and who you are.
Mm.
It takes a while, and it takes a lot of control at the beginning, and I assume that it is very difficult to, I don't know, hear somebody playing a different rhythm and be confident at the same time that you're playing the right thing.
Mhm.
Because we are used to have this kind of limited hypermeter, right? A limited kind of sense. We have one beat together, maybe we can do 3 against 2, 4 against 5, but we cannot do, I don't know, a different kind of rhythm which has
Right.
kind of this huge hypermeter then, right? It's a long thing. So it's interesting to compare things. Have you ever had the kind of students who were more kind of inclined to do that, or what's the difference? I mean, more kind of really kind of that they could feel that better than others.
Oh, absolutely. There's definitely students who are more, I guess, talented in terms of hearing a rhythm that they've never heard before and being able to jump in.
Yeah,
There's a wide variety in my students in terms of that sort of aptitude for
yeah.
rhythm.
Yeah. How do you, when you teach those, because you're teaching African drummings too, right? So, but how do you usually teach, to combine this kind of polyrhythm together? So, uh, do you guys learn patterns and then you try to combine them, or kind of how does it go?
Well, the way I teach it, first of all, these are performing ensembles, so we know
Mhm.
that at the end of the semester we're going to be on stage. So I
Right.
actually select pieces of the repertoire for each of my groups. Each group does usually 3 pieces a semester, and
Hmm.
so every week I give them a piece, a chunk of the piece,
Yes.
and I always make them learn by rote. So we sit in a big circle, and I play something, and they play it back, and I play something, and they play it back, and when they're ready, we go on to the next thing.
Hmm.
And as it
Yeah.
goes, and so many of my students are percussionists, so they're actually really really good, and they're quite quick at learning this stuff, and they can play the different parts simultaneously pretty early on in the semester. So then we start to add on some details like an introduction or a set of phrases or them improvising, but it always starts with call and response. I play
Right.
something, you play it back.
Yeah. Um, uh, uh, so, how is that? I mean, I saw that you have a lot of students in those groups. Kind of, I saw that there are big groups always, right? Is that kind of something that is interesting for them, or is it something that they would like, they're interested in doing further afterwards, or kind of how is the general feeling? Uh,
Well, the feedback that I get is very positive. They really enjoy it. I get people who take the class over and over. And many of my students are music education majors. So when possible, we stay in touch, like through Facebook or whatever. And I see a lot of them using African drumming in their own teaching, which I think is really exciting.
Right. Do you used to write down or kind of is just better to so do you write down the pieces that you're going to
Oh,
perform?
I do because
Yeah.
I'm very visual in terms of how I think music, and I simply can't remember all of the rhythms that I want to do. Like our end of semester concert is this this coming
Mhm.
Wednesday
Yeah.
in Fredonia, and it's lots and lots of material. So yes,
Right.
I do have my notes that I just refer to remember what happens when, but
Mhm.
the students have to do it all by memory.
Okay. So do they have that written part as well,
Um,
or
mm.
no? Oh,
if,
that's us for you. I
if
see.
they really want it, I'll give it to them after the semester, like so
Uh-huh.
they can have it to remember for when they're teaching.
So it is basically then. So the way that they're learning African drummings here is basically the same way that they would learn if they would be somewhere in Africa, and then
It's
uh,
it's
they would go
as
to a
it's as close
mentor.
as I can make it, you
Yeah,
know?
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have been in Africa now. You have kind of also seen some of those students, right? How they interact with their mentor and how they learn music over there. What's the difference in attitude?
Ah,
Sorry, yes,
no, that's a
it's
great
interesting to me.
question. It's quite different.
I mean, I tell you why, because I had a workshop in Kosovo time ago, and then I taught in Italy. I taught in different countries, and in every country has a different kind of because of the cultural environment. I found out that the students had always had different attitude towards learning in general and music in general than too. So I was curious about you know uh, what's your experience has been. And
Well, what I observed in Guinea, especially with the apprentice drummers, is such a huge respect for their mentor, and just treating them really, really, really respectfully, taking care of them. If they need, I mean, literally, they'll run errands for them or help them paint their house, or
I might want to move over there.
yeah, really. But
As a musician, I mean, you might probably want to move in a place where musicians are respected. Yeah.
it's nice. And the main difference with when they're learning is that my students, they want they want the whole package right away, and they want to improvise right away, whereas the African students are much more content to learn while they accompany and to be a supporting cog rather than a shining star. They're much
Yeah.
more willing to have that role for longer.
Right. I think I mean there is a similar thing when in Italy there are those marching bands. They accompany
Mm.
funerals usually, and in small towns there's usually a master who would teach you all the instruments, and they would teach you to read music for free. Then for a while you would give so you would play in these marching bands, but you won't receive any payments,
Mhm.
for that. And then once you become proficient enough, then you will kind of step up and then get paid for your performances. But
Oh,
it's a little bit, a very very similar way of teaching things. And I don't know, probably it is disappearing right now, but it
uh,
was in the past. It was that way. So they would receive music lessons for free. Um, but and since a very young age, and I think there was also that kind of same attitude of being satisfied with that little bit, right? So yeah, I have
mhm,
to do that so that I can get paid at one point.
right.
They wouldn't, and I think also that it's this education system here, which makes everything like has to be packaged in a certain way. Here, that's what you need to learn, but
Mhm.
learning happens. That's my belief. That it happens over time. Like I cannot
Mm,
learn everything in one day, even though I
yeah,
have the entire package there, right?
right.
it You learn day after day by being consistent in something, and I guess that's what happens there. How long do they practice with the master? So how many times a week? Or
Oh, that's a good question. It depends on the season, because they're basically, as soon as you know the basic patterns, you are accompanying your master at the gigs,
yeah,
right? They don't really rehearse. Rehearsal is really for staged performances,
yeah,
but for village or neighborhood drumming for events, you accompany as a learner at the gig, and they vary by season. So as I said, there's a lot of agricultural calendar stuff in Guinea. And so if it's a season where there's tons and tons of work going on, there'll be fewer
Mhm.
gigs, and then there'll be a lot more gigs in
Yeah.
the off season. Yeah. So maybe once a week to 4 times a week,
Mhm. Yeah.
and each session is several hours.
Yeah.
Each
Wow.
gig, each dancing experience is several hours.
And as you said, they don't get paid for that, do they?
Well, the mentor gets paid. I think there's a scale of how experienced you have to be. Kind of like what you were describing.
Oh, yeah, it
When you're
must be.
proficient
It
enough,
might be.
you take a cut, but it's at the mentor's discretion.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Interesting. So and I'm very patient and kind of keep learning, and most of them they won't do that as a profession, right? So then it
Right,
would be just a side thing, right? A
right.
hobby. Um, Very interesting. So what is the most interesting part of your entire experience with this exchange, cultural exchange with African music?
Well, I think it's the opportunity to put on someone else's mind for a minute. And I mean, the way of thinking is so different, and I don't think I could touch upon that amount of or that level of difference in any other way where I can actually almost experience it. I mean, I'm not as good, as my teachers, obviously, but even in my own small way, to put on their consciousness in the music, it's really quite special.
Yeah, yeah. But they do also consider music kind of in a very different way, right? I assume that music has an important role for them. While we here in the States, or in Europe as well, we don't think about the function of music in the society, right, or in the community. So we kind of, oh well, that's just music. You don't know more about that. It's just like, oh, musicians, just that's it's a kind of a we are, as because in school, like cutting funds for music, and they don't think about music as being important for as a form of education. I assume that in Africa it has a very different role, right?
I would have to say yes. And again, I haven't been in Guinea in a while, and it is true that in urban areas things change,
Right.
things change. But
They
when
try
I
to
was
imitate us, right? They
right,
try to imitate everything bad that we have.
it's true. It's
Yes.
true. But what's fascinating is there's a lot of people who don't go to school in
Yeah.
Guinea, in
Yes.
particular, because it's not free. Or
Right.
if it's free, you have to have uniforms and books that you can't afford.
Right.
So their musical education is 100% real life, right?
Hmm.
Going to the celebration for a wedding or a baby naming or
Hmm.
anything.
Yeah.
Anything's a reason to drum and dance. So I just find it really interesting the distinction between valuing something in a society like ours, where really we go to school for a lot of time,
Yeah.
and so much of what we value is simply what is taught to us, or what we're taught is valuable,
Hmm.
it formally, right?
Yeah.
Outright. Whereas in a traditional culture, learning by doing and learning by seeing what your elders find necessary is really it's really different.
Yeah. I mean, that's why if you think about the original school, that's why we should go to school, right? So that we know what somebody else has done before us. Just we mistake that at times, and we forget, to value the role of education, which is just really kind of to uh, let us know what somebody else has done before us, and then how we can do that better in the future.
Mhm.
Um, so what are your projects now with kind of with this type of music, or what would you envision in the next years?
Well, I do a lot of teaching. Um, I need to spend more time in Guinea studying. It's been very difficult because I wanted to lead the study abroad through SUNY Fredonia, and Guinea's too difficult a place. So we go to Ghana.
Right.
Ghana is wonderful. It has its own very
Yeah.
different culture, but it's also more developed. So you can
Mhm.
actually count on your toilet flushing and the electricity.
Yeah.
These are really important things to my undergraduates.
Yes, of course. Yes.
I've ended up spending more time in Ghana, and I need to spend more time in Guinea, and that that would be a top priority for my
Mhm.
plans.
Yeah, but
The other thing,
what would you like to? I mean, to learn more about those two places, or about music in these two places. What is that you didn't? I mean, if you want to go somewhere, it's because you feel that something is missing, right? And then
yes,
you don't know enough about something, so
yes.
you want to know more. Um,
Well, my personal experience learning has mostly been formal classes.
mhm,
And if I were able to spend more time in Guinea, I would be able to observe um, what people do when they're not in an official class,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I also would have the opportunity to hear and witness more different musicians, whereas my teachers are sort of a set of people that I'm quite familiar with at this point. So it'd be
Right.
nice to hear other
Yeah.
interpretations and
Yeah.
um,
I think we when somebody will move over here, unconsciously you adapt a little bit to the environment, so you
mm,
might try to translate what you had with what other people have over here, so it might not be as authentic as if you go there and then you say, okay, that's was a boy was adapted, but now I see the real thing, right? What is the real thing
yeah,
over here? Yeah.
it's true. And because the expatriate people that I tend to study with, they almost all were in the national ballet system,
Yeah.
which is a series. It's not just one. We they say the national ballet, but it's not just one national ballet. It's several, and they call it ballet because it's a French speaking country, not because it's ballet dancing. Um, and it's a system where people actually go out to the village and audition
Mhm.
hot players and dancers, and then they join these troops and they
Right.
mount really fancy staged produced versions of traditional music. So most of the people I've studied with went through that system. So it just informs how they do things. And I think what's lacking in my experience is more of a village style. Just being there
Yeah.
and hearing it. Yeah.
How they get to that audition, maybe, right? So
Exactly.
how they start and then get to audition, as performers. That's quite interesting, though, that they have this kind of system, which is like almost as having a conservatory, maybe, right?
Yeah,
Because if you organize concerts and so on, so you're a performer, and you get to perform and you do these stage things, which is different probably than what you experience in a village, by
for sure.
being
For
uh,
sure.
by
But it had a
learning.
lot to do with post-colonialism
Yeah,
and, because these countries in Africa were carved out of areas that had multiple ethnic groups. So
yeah,
putting together national ballets was one way of bringing together the different ethnic groups and teaching each other their dances and
yeah,
music. So
yeah.
it's a really
Uh,
interesting phenomenon.
yeah, a sort of melting pot of
Mhm.
dancing. So it is quite interesting. But I think also that by doing that, you have to compromise on certain things
Yes,
that probably are a
absolutely.
little bit less original, right? Because not everybody will kind of agree to. I mean, as in everything we humans do, right? We try
Right,
to compromise, adjust, and then so that we don't have problems, right? And then
right.
that everything is. But so Now, how would that then? You would go there with the students, right?
If I went to Guinea, it probably would just be with Ringo, because
Yeah.
as I said, it's too. I still think it's not developed enough for me to want to bring 20-year-olds.
Yeah, it can be dangerous
So,
probably for them.
and that's the problem, is in terms of finding the time,
Right.
because you
Yeah.
need to go at the time where there's going to be gigs, but at a time where you can get away. So when we did go, it was 5 weeks over Christmas break.
Yeah.
So I left early, stayed the whole break, got back like the day class started, because college has that nice long winter break.
Right.
So
But
that
probably in the summer would be not ideal. Right.
no, it's if I could avoid it, I would, because it's so much hotter, and
Hmm.
it's well, okay, it's rainier and more humid. The actual heat numbers don't vary all that much, but the
Yeah.
raininess and the humidity makes it really miserable in the summer. Well, especially for someone who's a baby like me.
So you researched a lot for your dissertation. What was the kind of thing that you would have never expected to find, and then
Oh,
maybe you had to kind of you said, "Oh, well, didn't know anything about this thing." Um,
you know, um, well, one thing I learned that is interesting to me is that djembe drumming is unique in all of Africa. There's almost never a drum you play with two hands instead of using a stick.
yeah.
And I didn't realize how rare that was, but it's actually very rare. So
Wow.
so the actual drums they use are the style is unique. Um, let's see. I was a little bit surprised that all 70 pieces that I studied were distinct from one another, because I didn't know the true variety of, as I said, the two drum parts that make it unique,
Yeah.
that they would actually have that many distinct pieces. And that's not
Right.
even all. There are more, but that did kind of surprise me.
Yeah, but I mean, it is a lot for having just two different call and answered, and having that kind of differences, right?
Yeah,
So you could categorize basically all those different rhythms.
I did. So
Yeah.
first they immediately break down into whether they're in a beat with four subdivisions, so like
Hmm.
what we would call 2/4 or 4/4,
Right.
and then a beat with three subdivisions, which we would call 12/8, or and there's a couple pieces in 9/8, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So they break down immediately into those two types, and then
Yeah.
within those broad separations, we've got lots and lots of different further classification.
Yeah. Awesome. So, how is that connected to? This is my own interest. How is it connected to um, the kind of the type of language or type of songs that they sing? Is that kind of is there a connection between the different rhythms, and then kind of
Mhm.
besides being a kind of for certain things, is there a connection between kind of the spoken language, or kind of this what they
You
sing,
know,
the words, the kind of meter?
this is something that I don't know a ton about,
Hmm.
so I don't want to go out on a limb too far, but in terms of the structure of the songs, it tends to be call and response. Something stays the same, something
Hmm.
changes,
Yeah.
and then there's a lot of improvisation in the lead part.
Yeah.
And
So it's basically the same kind of thing, right?
yes,
Yeah. So what
yes,
they do with the drums is the same as kind of if they would sing.
yeah,
But
yeah.
what I will kind of was kind of curious about is if there is a connection between the melody lines, or kind of and kind of the rhythmic patterns that they
Mm.
have um, below.
I would say not so much, but there is definitely a style of melodic line that gets used.
Hmm.
And the melodic instruments. So, I mean, we're talking about one genre of music,
Right.
Malinke dance drumming.
Yeah.
There are other styles of music that are alive and well. And I do play one other Guinean style on the xylophone, which their xylophone we call the
Yeah.
balafone. And so in terms of melodic material, I'm much more familiar with it from that side because I
Hmm.
play melodic stuff when I'm playing
Right.
my balafone. And it's meant to be sung. The
Hmm.
balafone masters actually sing what the
Hmm.
same thing they're playing, although they play it polyphonically, and then
Yes.
they sing one line.
Yeah.
So there's
Awesome.
definitely a style of melody, or maybe I should say a family of styles of melodies that are used in Guinea
Hmm.
and very recognizable. But I don't think it really aligns that much with the drumming. It's much more
It's
uh,
sort of a line on kind of that's kind of, it's not a line. It's a kind of it's a kind of is it also more improvised or?
well, definitely the lead part is improvised. There'll be something that repeats,
Hmm.
alternating with something that it gets improvised. But the actual line of music itself is much more legato
Uh-huh.
than the drum pattern. So like there are vocal styles in Africa that are literally more constructed like a drum pattern,
Yeah.
right? Like you might think of pygmy singing from Central Africa, where
Right.
they might actually sing short rhythmic cells that overlap. This
Yeah.
is much more
It's very complex. I mean, it's very interesting, right?
yeah, oh
Because
yeah,
they
very much.
developed that kind of for their own kind of style and um. So now I have a very last question for you, and then I let you go, and I thank you for being here before, you know. Letting you go, but what would you wish, for, so if a music student would really like to, um, it's interested in kind of learning a little bit more about African drumming. What would you suggest? And then, what would be your wish for the future? Then, for our communities.
Well, I think the wish would be that there would be some more access to authentic traditional music.
Hmm.
So because it really does cluster into the very, very large cities where the expatriates live.
Yeah.
So better access to authentic learning experiences, and definitely spending time in Africa, even if you can only go for a short period. Just getting your feet on the ground and your ears in that world,
Yeah.
that would definitely be um, essential.
Awesome. So, Tiffany, thank you so much for being here today. And
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
thank you so much. And so, I wish you a nice afternoon here in Buffalo. And then I will probably see you around.
Hope
And
so.
thank you so much. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.